we'll stay with English for now. So we have another distinguished panel here, and in this panel we will seek to connect the theoretical foundations with the practical realities on the ground, and it will be difficult to find more experienced and more equipped professionals to actually discuss the issues of human dignity and the human person than the professionals gathered in this panel today. So just to reflect on Professor Snead's introduction, staying with the definition, there are many definitions regarding human dignity, which comes up especially when it comes to the debate about euthanasia. So now that we have a little bit more time, let's spend some time to elaborate on why it's necessary to base our understanding of human dignity on a Christian anthropology. And Professor Snead, if you could take over.
Sure. It's a great question because human dignity is a concept that is much more alive, certainly in a juridical sense, in Europe than it is in my country. In the United States, we talk more about freedom and autonomy than we talk about human dignity. Human dignity, but that's backwards in a way because human dignity is in the inviolability of the human person and the identity of the human person as a singular, unrepeatable, infinitely valuable living being. Has to be the first question that we ask because everything else follows from that. We saw that in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, that every proposition after World War II that they articulated in that declaration from UNESCO, many of whom were influenced by Christian thinkers, they had to come up with a foundational concept from which all these other rights and entitlements and duties followed. And they settled on human dignity, even though they famously agreed not to discuss where human dignity comes from, because they would break down into disagreement immediately since they were a mixed group, secular and religious. But it's absolutely essential to have a first-order principle about human inviolability, human value, human worth, human identity. And it seems to me that the Christian answer to that question, that is, we're made in the image and likeness of God, is the most profound and compelling vision. And the issue for us in politics and policy and law is how to translate that notion of the imago Dei into a language that's intelligible to people that don't share our faith.
Yes, I am a member of parliament. I have been over 30 years in the Finnish parliament, and then I'm also a medical doctor. I worked as a physician before this political career, and I think that in both of these realms, the human dignity is the foundation and basis of the ethics of both politics and medicine. Because you can't, the Christian view, how it defines human dignity, that we all are created as an image of God, it is absolutely, it is the best explanation how to value people. And for me, when I studied medicine many decades ago, the question of abortion was very, very it was topical. At that time, we had very much discussion in our society about this issue, and I'm happy that I had to think thoroughly about this issue. And for me, as Christian, the answer was very clear, especially when I studied medicine and I studied how the development of human being begins from the conception, and the answer was for me very clear that we can't say any other beginning for the human value and human dignity than the beginning of life in conception. And so it is also in the other end of the life just now in Finnish Parliament, the question of euthanasia is very, very topical. We have their initiative in my committee, and we are just now discussing about it, and I hope that we would succeed in this issue. But in the same way, in politics, I think that how can we explain the equality of all human beings better than telling that they are created as image of God, and that's why we all are equal.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Professor, for that incredible talk. It felt like you condensed a book or more into about 15 minutes, and my head is still spinning from all of the content, but it was really outstanding. I come at this question, this panel, from the context, I'm a human rights lawyer. I practice international human rights law at places like the European Court of Human Rights and United Nations, and so for me, the concepts that were raised, they have real application in the legal field. And I think what I particularly appreciated about your presentation and this conversation is really the stark choice that is before us here in terms of how we ground things like human rights, how we ground things like human dignity. And the stark choice that we're faced with, and that was presented here, at least in the Western world, is either a reconnecting to the Christian position that we're made in the image of God, and that is the grounding for the things that we're talking about, or, as Professor Snead said, it comes from within ourselves, this expressive individualism. And I remember reading a Guardian article. Now, the Guardian in the UK is the farthest left that you can be within the mainstream. And they wrote an editorial about 10 years ago on exactly this point. And what they were reflecting on is what will happen in Europe as it moves away from its Christian foundation. And the question that they posed was that the future of Europe will have some sort of morality, but if it's not a Christian morality, then what is it going to be? And The Guardian, this far-left newspaper, said that it will be far less universalist. The idea that we have rights and that we are equal did not arise in a pre-Christian era. It came out of Christianity. And so the morality that we're stepping into now, that is not an abstract thing, it's not something that's just talked about in philosophy seminars at university. It plays out in our laws, it plays out within the frameworks in which we live our lives. That morality no longer being grounded in Christianity, but being grounded in expressive individualism, it's playing out in all of these different areas. And we can hit all the different concepts that we're talking about: abortion, bioethics, euthanasia, transgenderism, surrogacy, pornography, and transhumanism. You know, the list goes on. It feels like these are lots of different things, but they're actually coming down to one thing, the thing that was just discussed, this idea of expressive individualism or autonomy, or in the way that the poem Invictus put it, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. That poem, this is the 150th anniversary of that poem. Christopher Hitchens, the famous atheist, referred to it as the anthem of humanism par excellence. And that is the stark reality, the stark choice that we're facing as we move down the path in Europe and the Western world towards this expressive individualism, and we're basing our laws, our legislation, our societies around it. My concern is that we're only just scratching the surface of where all of this will lead. But more of that to come, I suppose.
Well, John Napot. So, well, thank you very much for organizing all this. First of all, I wanted to thank the organization very much for all these wonderful conference, and also thank you, Carmen, for the wonderful lecture. And I think, well, everything almost has been said, I think, at least in a nutshell. And but one of the things that I think we would lose if we miss our Christian understanding of human dignity is we miss to capture the relational aspects of human dignity, which it has already been pointed, but I would like to focus on that. Paradoxically, we have a very atomistic vision of dignity, in many aspects. expressive individualism is it has been winning the battle or the field in the courts during the last decades. Now I think is a bit exhausted, I would say. But I am also a legal expert like Paul, and I see how the European Court of Human Rights uses Article 8 of the Convention precisely to impose that vision of expressive individualism, and it uses the concept of dignity very much as autonomy. We are understanding the concept of dignity as pure autonomy. That creates paradoxically it's an autonomy without teleology, an autonomy which is somehow pointless. Then that produces a paradox, which is, I would put it with the words of Robert Spemann, the great philosopher, who said that the end of every teleology is a paradoxically anti-teleological teleology. So what's the new anti-teleological teleology? We are moving from a liberalism of, we would say, dissolution to a liberalism of imposition. I think that's something we start to experience in the decision of courts. For example, through the persecution, we talk about that dignity as autonomy, but we don't protect religious freedom, less and less in many courts. Religious freedom is under threat. Conscientious objection of doctors is under threat. And at the same time, we try to make it compatible with a vision of human dignity that is absolute. But that means autonomy. We don't capture the relational aspects of dignity. That's what I would say. And even we fail to capture that aspects of dignity even in some things that may seem positive even for us. For example, when we compare the criminals to the innocent people and we say that you cannot put it in jail a criminal or even the death penalty or approach to the death penalty, and I'm not going to defend the death penalty, but even our approach to death penalty doesn't capture the relational aspects of dignity. We ground on dignity the right not to suffer the penalty, and we compare that situation to the situation of an innocent person. It's like killing an innocent person. So we are failing to understand some crucial aspect of dignity through that vision of dignity as autonomy. That's what I would say.
I think it is already very clear that when we talk about the human person or human dignity, we are not just talking about abstract ideas, but these ideas actually manifest themselves in court decisions and decisions on people's lives in many cases. So if you could go around and say, what do you think are the most alarming challenges to the human person in your respective fields? What is it that you detect, that you see going in the wrong direction right now? And Paul, maybe let's start with you.
Oh, sure. Okay, well, I think, this is going to be like a depressing list. I mean, we'll just like fire some things off. The way I have come to think about this is probably a first wave and a second wave. Okay, so just recap on the first wave, all building on what the Professor said in terms of I suppose the idea, the best phrase that I think it's been articulated in the West is my body, my choice. I think that's the perfect summation of what we're talking about. And so what does that lead to? Obviously, widespread abortion, euthanasia, attempting to be introduced in every Western context, breakdown of marriage and the family and sex contained within that. So you have the hookup culture, same-sex, and so forth. And most recently, we've seen it in the transgender debate. I mean, my body, my choice is the sort of ultimate expression of that movement as well. I can do this dualism that who I really am is in my mind, and my body, it can be changed, it can be whatever, it can be destroyed. So look, these are all things that we're aware of. They're debates taking place in our parliaments. It's, I would say, the first wave. But there's no limiting principle to my body, my choice. It's just that the limitation is one of technology, not of philosophy. And the technology is moving extremely fast, way faster than is really being talked about in the mainstream. And so this is producing the next wave of attack, let's say, that we're going to see play out in the next century. And so, of course, artificial intelligence is going to drive this process, but advancements in robotics and synthetic biology, or synbio, and now you just see some of the stories. So exogenesis is a phrase that most of us perhaps haven't come across, but it's the idea of using synthetic biology to grow babies out of the womb. For example, China are working on this right now. We've been working on cloning for the last 30 years. We cloned Dolly the sheep in England in the mid-90s, and that technology continues to advance. And then we're going to see through the IVF process, which we've already had for many decades, an increase in eugenics as that technology advances as well, where we're going to be able to screen, and this technology is emergent, screen for IQ, screen for likelihood of future diseases. And so at this point, we end up essentially tiptoeing into the dystopian books and movies that were made at the turn of the century and before. The Island is one of the movies, where they grow humans in a farm essentially to act as organ replacements. Or Gattaca, which is my personal favorite movie, which is all about elite eugenics to create an elite human species. That technology, it was set in the not too distant future. Well, that future has arrived. Or perhaps the founder of the genre A Brave New World, the phrase of test tube babies came from that book, and we're seeing these things play out. So I know you're going to finish talking about hope, so I won't continue my list. But this is the way I think about it. This first wave, which we all talk about, it sets the debate. But behind that first wave, through technology, is really another wave is coming very fast.
So, Professor Snead, you also had a very long list, so I was wondering...
Yeah, I had a long list, too. But your list is pretty good, I have to say. Not good in the normative sense, but it's comprehensive. I would say that the combination of genomic interventions with assisted reproduction is hugely problematic, especially as it's fueled by a tech sector in the Silicon Valley who sees everything, every human question, as an engineering problem or a manufacturing problem to solve rather than a human question to think about in a deeper way. At the other end of life, rooted in expressive individualism, we have a deep wave of new enthusiasm for assisted suicide and euthanasia and a lowering of the bar. And again, it always begins with this kind of thin conception of compassion, wanting to help people and alleviate suffering, or a kind of thin conception of freedom, which is to say, I want people to be able to maximize their own will and at the end of their life in existential matters. But you now see people in Canada especially being euthanized because they're given the choice of that versus living in a diminished state. So you have a person who's like, I'd like you to build a ramp so I can get my wheelchair up to my apartment. And the Canadian government says, well, we're not going to pay for that, but we would definitely pay for euthanasia. Or euthanizing people with eating disorders or people with autism. Or a couple in Germany, identical twins in Germany, these elderly identical twins just committed suicide in Germany because they didn't want to live anymore. So just a pure assertion of will underwriting these incredibly dangerous practices. And I will say, just make one little footnote, in arguing in the public square, it seems to me, obviously we have to make first-order arguments about human dignity and the things that we all believe, the Imago Dei, but there are also available a whole host of persuasive arguments on the prudential dimensions of these issues and the threats to the weak and vulnerable that would resonate with people who don't yet share our understanding of the Imago Dei.
The doctors should be those who defend life and help people, but they are very widely weaponized to kill their patients, to kill children, to wombs, and also in many post-Christian countries to kill old people or sick people. And it doesn't need any high technology. It is not difficult to kill people. You do not need to study 6 years to learn it. But I would like to take another point, because we are living in that kind of situation, at least in Finland and also in other post-Christian Western countries, where there is some kind of mental health crisis among young people, and the psychologists speak about that it is connected with identity crisis. Young people are confused that who they are, because they are not anymore told what is the foundation to be a human being. So they are like they would be in marketplace shopping pieces of identity from a wide range of ideologies, relationships, sexual orientations, or even dozens of different genders, and that's why I'm worried of young people living in that kind of confusion, and that I think that this time is needs that we tell that the identity is given. It is not something that you have to try to seek to yourself, but it is given to you.
Yes. Well, first, before commenting another pressing issue that I think, well, of course, I agree with all these. These are some of the main issues. There are so many issues, as Paul said. The least could be the pressing, but I wanted to start with just quoting a psalm that, in my view, I mean, it's striking because it's a psalm that talks about how man becomes an anthropomorphism. When it's how the idols, the machine as an idol, and man becoming what the creature of its hands. Instead of treating the machine as an anthropomorphism, the machine becomes the model, and this becomes from dualism. The idea of dualism makes the man just a machine. The machine becomes the model, and man ends up becoming a machine, which is what is happening with this new tech. It says, it's Psalm 114. Why do the nations say, where is their God? Our God is in heaven. He does whatever pleases him. But their idols are silver and gold, made by the human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, feet but cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats. And now it says, those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. Never in the history of mankind, this psalm has been fulfilled like in our days. Never in the history of mankind. It's like a prophecy, and it's what is happening with the new tech. We are becoming anthropomorphisms because we haven't understood that the machine is an anthropomorphism, and we are not understanding what subjectivity means, really. And just to point out another pressing issue, I think the recognition of personhood to nature. We are starting a very dangerous movement in the environmental jurisprudence and case law. I mean, I'm very environmentalist in the classical sense, so to speak. And I see how we are starting to recognize personhood in the courts, in some of the main human rights courts. It's not still the main trend, but it's little by little, it is becoming mainstream. In Spain, last year, a geographical accident was recognized. I mean, a geographical area, part of the sea. It was an ecosystem. It was recognized. It was bestowed or endowed with personhood. And all the comparative law quoted by the Constitutional Court was comparative law of Latin American nations that actually are taking these views from animistic religions. So you can see, first, the lack of neutrality. The promise of neutrality of religion is false, because all these has a source that is not neutral. It's a religious view, a pantheistic view, and an animistic view. And at the same time, there is an imposition of that view. So it's not neutral. That's part of the anti-teleological teleology that I would call that we are, or the kind of lack of neutrality that we are accepting. Just that.
So because I was told to watch the time, just so that in closing, if we could share a few words of encouragement, because we talked about many concerning things, but my question is, do you see any hint of maybe a growing consensus about the proper meaning of the human person, or things going in the right direction in any way in this realm? Do you see any positive signs of that happening in your respective fields?
Yeah. Silence. No. Look. There's one thing that's been interesting in the last few years is a growing international movement against the practice of commercial surrogacy. And it's interesting. I mean, surrogacy, it touches on almost everything that we've talked about. It separates relationship between mother and father. It separates relationship between biological mother and child, and it destroys countless embryos in the process. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so, in many ways, you would think that the practice of surrogacy is the sort of perfect example of everything we're talking about. And yet, there is a growing movement against it that probably seemed impossible just a few years ago. We have leading UN experts publishing reports against it, calling for a global ban. We have different nations like Italy speaking out and banning the practice. And we see this spreading from place to place. Now, to pick up on the remark about prudence versus grounding these things in a Christian worldview, none of the arguments being made against the exportation of commercial surrogacy around the world are really being made. You don't have to be a Christian to agree with the arguments that are being made, and yet these arguments are not only persuasive, but they're actually effective and they're working. And so it's sort of, I raise it as an example because it bucks the trend of what we're seeing in these other sort of bioethical spaces, and I think can point to an example where you can build together quite a broad coalition of different people who don't agree on some of the first principles, but can nevertheless find common ground in this area. And to the extent that acts as some sort of encouragement in the other areas, I share it.
So we have seen just in very short past in Finland and also in other Western countries, growing interest among young people, especially among young men, to Christianity. And I think that in this confusive world, they are looking for ground where they can build their own identity and also their life in the future. And what is important is that they can hear the clear message that we have the dignity because we are created in the image of God. But the other side is also that we all are sinners, because it is also a very important explanation for many, many issues that we have been speaking here. And that we all are in need of grace in Jesus. And this is what gives me optimism that that kind of movement is going on.
Just if you could be brief, because we only have 1.5 minutes.
Take half a minute, I'll take the minute.
Very, very briefly. I think there is something positive, which is I see that among young people, I'm in the field of education, and what I see among younger people is especially confusion. But I don't see, I see this imposition of ideologies as something more and more coming from the elites, but there is dissatisfaction in society. That dissatisfaction mixed with confusion. So I think there is a great opportunity to show the truth and attract people. The truth is always very attractive, And what I see is that the people are not so committed, the normal, ordinary people are not so committed with these agendas, and that's positive.
And this connects to what you're saying to my friend, my Spanish friend. The reason I'm optimistic is because the beauty of the truth that we're professing is attractive. Mother Teresa, St. Teresa of Calcutta, said that the source of the problems in the world is that we've forgotten that we belong to one another. And a vision of human identity and flourishing, which we belong to one another, and our flourishing is realized in caring for one another and being cared for, is far more beautiful than the isolated, atomized will that's lonely and dislocated and by him or herself in the world. So beauty, I think, is reason for optimism.
Thank you. I would love to continue, especially hearing about the positive and the words of encouragement, but we will have to do that over lunch. So thank you so much for our panel. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And to the audience, thank you for your attention.